The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Windsor Castle as Royal Guard James Mitchell took his position outside the main entrance. At 28 years old, James had served the royal family for over 5 years, standing perfectly still for hours at a time, his red uniform pressed to perfection and his tall black hat positioned just right. He was proud of his job, even though most days felt exactly the same. James came from a small town where his family struggled to make ends meet. His father worked in a factory and his mother cleaned houses to help pay the bills. When James got accepted into the Queen's Guard, it felt like winning the lottery. The steady pay helped his family and he felt important protecting the royal family. But lately, something had been bothering James. His younger sister Emma had been diagnosed with a serious illness that required expensive treatment. The family's medical bills were piling up, and even with his guard salary, they couldn't afford everything Emma needed. James had been working extra shifts and sending most of his money home, but it still wasn't enough. That Tuesday morning started like any other. James stood at his post, watching tourists take pictures and trying not to move a muscle. The royal family wasn't expected to leave the castle that day, so it would probably be quiet. He had been standing there for about 2 hours when he heard the sound of small footsteps approaching. Prince George, who was about 10 years old at the time, came walking toward the entrance with his nanny following close behind. The young prince was supposed to be heading to his morning lessons, but something seemed different about him today. Instead of walking straight past James like usual, Prince George stopped right in front of the guard. James kept looking straight ahead, as he was trained to do. Royal guards weren't supposed to interact with the family unless it was an emergency. But Prince George didn't move. He just stood there looking up at James with curious eyes. "You look sad today," Prince George said quietly, so only James could hear. James was shocked. In all his years as a guard, none of the royal family had ever spoken directly to him while he was on duty. He wasn't sure what to do. Should he respond? Should he ignore the prince? His training told him to stay silent, but something in the boy's voice made James want to answer. The nanny called for Prince George to come along, but the young prince held up his hand. "Just a minute, please," he said politely. Then he looked back at James. "I know you're not supposed to talk," Prince George whispered, "but I can see it in your eyes. My grandmother taught me that sometimes people need help, even when they can't ask for it." James felt his heart beating faster. How could a 10-year-old boy see what he was trying so hard to hide? He had been careful not to let his personal problems show at work. But somehow this young prince had noticed something that no one else had seen. Prince George reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. He placed it gently on the ground near James's feet and then walked away with his nanny. Not saying another word, James stared straight ahead for the rest of his shift, but he couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. When his replacement finally arrived 4 hours later, James quickly picked up the piece of paper before anyone could see it. Written in careful handwriting were the words, "Meet me in the castle garden at 3 p.m. today. Come alone, George." James spent the rest of the day wondering if he should go to the garden or pretend the whole thing never happened. Meeting with a member of the royal family outside of official duties could cost him his job, but something about Prince George's kind eyes made him feel like the boy genuinely wanted to help. At exactly 3 p.m., James walked nervously toward the castle's private garden. He had changed out of his guard uniform and into regular clothes, hoping no one would notice him. The garden was beautiful, with colorful flowers and perfectly trimmed hedges. James had walked past it many times during his patrols, but had never actually been inside. He found Prince George sitting on a small bench under a large oak tree. The young prince was alone, which surprised James. Usually, royal children were always accompanied by adults. "Thank you for coming," Prince George said with a smile. "Please sit down." James sat carefully on the other end of the bench, still not sure if this was a good idea. "Your Highness, I'm not sure we should be meeting like this. If someone sees us..." "Don't worry," Prince George interrupted. "I asked my grandmother for permission. She said it was fine as long as we talked in the garden where the security cameras could see us." James felt a bit relieved but still confused. Why would a prince want to talk to him? "You seemed really worried this morning," Prince George continued. "I know you guards aren't supposed to show emotions, but I could tell something was wrong. My father always says that good leaders notice when people around them are struggling." James didn't know what to say. He had been taught that his personal life should never interfere with his duties. But here was this young boy, showing more concern for him than most adults ever had. "Is it okay if I ask what's bothering you?" Prince George asked gently. Something about the prince's sincere tone made James want to open up. Maybe it was because Prince George was just a child, or maybe it was because he had been carrying this burden alone for so long. "My sister is very sick," James said quietly. "She needs special treatment that costs a lot of money. My family is trying their best, but we can't afford everything she needs." Prince George listened carefully, nodding as James spoke. "That must be really scary for you and your family." "It is," James admitted. "I became a guard because I wanted to help my family. But even with my salary, it's not enough. I don't know what else to do." Prince George was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "You know, when I have problems, my grandmother always tells me that asking for help isn't giving up. She says that's how communities work. People help each other." "But I'm just a guard," James said. "People like me don't usually get help with things like this." "That's not true," Prince George said firmly. "My grandmother also taught me that everyone deserves help when they need it, no matter what job they have or where they come from." James felt tears starting to form in his eyes. He quickly wiped them away, embarrassed to be crying in front of a prince. "It's okay to be sad," Prince George said. "When my grandfather was sick, my father cried too. Crying doesn't make you weak." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching butterflies fly around the garden flowers. James couldn't believe he was having this conversation with a 10-year-old member of the royal family. "Can I ask you something?" Prince George said. "What's your sister's name and what kind of treatment does she need?" James hesitated for a moment, then decided to trust this kind young boy. "Her name is Emma. She has a condition that affects her blood and she needs a special treatment that's only available at a private hospital. The doctors say it could help her get better, but it costs more money than my family makes in a whole year." Prince George listened intently, asking a few more questions about Emma's condition and the treatment she needed. James was surprised by how thoughtful the prince's questions were. "I want to help," Prince George said finally, "but I need to think about the best way to do it. Can you meet me here again tomorrow at the same time?" James nodded, feeling a strange mix of hope and disbelief. "Your Highness, you don't have to." "I want to," Prince George interrupted. "That's what friends do, right?" That night James could hardly sleep. He kept thinking about his conversation with Prince George and wondering what the young prince might be planning. Part of him worried that he had shared too much, while another part felt hopeful for the first time in months. The next day at work, James tried to focus on his duties, but he kept glancing at the clock. When 3 p.m. finally arrived, he hurried to the garden, eager to see what Prince George had to say. The prince was already waiting on the same bench, but this time he had a folder with him. His face was serious, like he had been thinking hard about something important. "I talked to my grandmother last night," Prince George began. "I told her about you and your sister." James felt his stomach drop. He wondered if he was about to get in trouble for involving a royal child in his personal problems. "Don't worry," Prince George said quickly, seeing James's worried expression. "She's not angry. Actually, she was impressed that you've been working so hard to help your family while still doing such a good job as a guard." James felt a wave of relief wash over him. "My grandmother told me something interesting," Prince George continued. "She said the royal family has a special fund that helps people who work for us when they have emergencies. But many people don't know about it because they're too proud to ask for help." James had never heard of such a fund. In all his years of service, no one had ever mentioned it. Prince George opened his folder and pulled out some papers. "These are the application forms. My grandmother's secretary helped me get them. The fund can cover medical expenses for family members of royal staff." James stared at the papers, hardly believing what he was hearing. "Are you sure this is real?" "Very sure," Prince George said with a smile. "But there's one condition. You have to fill out the forms yourself and submit them properly. My grandmother said it's important that you ask for help officially, not just because you're friends with me." James took the papers with shaking hands. As he read through them, he saw that the fund could indeed cover the exact type of treatment Emma needed. There were forms to fill out about her condition, the proposed treatment, and the family's financial situation. "Why didn't anyone tell me about this before?" James asked. "My grandmother said that most people in your position think they're not important enough to ask for help." She said it makes her sad because the fund was created specifically for situations like yours. Prince George pulled out another piece of paper. I also did some research about your sister's condition. I found out that the hospital where she needs treatment has a special program for families who can't afford the full cost. If you combine that program with the Royal Fund, it should cover everything. James couldn't believe how much work this 10-year-old boy had done to help him. Prince George, I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, Prince George replied. But I do want to ask you for something. Anything, James said. Promise me that after your sister gets better, you'll help other people who are in the same situation you are in. Tell them about the fund. Let them know it's okay to ask for help. James nodded enthusiastically. I promise, Prince George smiled. Good. Now let's fill out these forms together. I'm pretty good at paperwork for a 10-year-old. They spent the next hour going through each form carefully. Prince George helped James understand the medical terms and made sure all the information was correct. The young prince was surprisingly knowledgeable about the application process, having spent time learning about it from his grandmother's staff. There's one more thing, Prince George said as they finished the last form.
My grandmother wants to meet with you tomorrow.
Not as a guard, but as someone applying for help from the Royal Fund. James felt nervous about meeting the Queen, but Prince George reassured him. She's very kind, especially when it comes to helping people. Just be honest with her like you were with me. As they prepared to leave the garden, Prince George turned to James one more time. You know, my great-grandmother always said that the royal family's job isn't just to be served by others, but to serve others too. Helping you and your sister isn't charity. It's what we're supposed to do. James walked back to his quarters that evening, feeling like his whole world had changed. In just 2 days, a 10-year-old prince had shown him more kindness and practical help than he had ever expected to receive. The next morning, James woke up feeling more nervous than he had ever felt in his life. Meeting with the Queen was something he had never imagined would happen, especially not under these circumstances. He put on his best civilian clothes and practiced what he might say, though his hands were still shaking as he walked to the appointed meeting room in the castle. Prince George was waiting outside the room when James arrived. Don't be nervous, the young prince said with an encouraging smile. Just remember, my grandmother is a person too. She cares about the people who work here. James took a deep breath as Prince George knocked on the door. When they entered, James was surprised to see that the room was much smaller and more comfortable than he had expected. The Queen was sitting in a simple chair by the window, looking much more relaxed than when he had seen her during official ceremonies. Your Majesty, James said, bowing nervously. Please sit down, James, the Queen said kindly. George has told me quite a bit about you and your family situation. James sat carefully on the edge of a chair, still feeling overwhelmed by the situation. I understand your sister Emma is facing some serious health challenges, the Queen continued. George showed me the research he did about her condition and the treatment options. I'm quite impressed by his thoroughness. Actually, Prince George beamed with pride at his grandmother's praise. I've reviewed your application for the Emergency Medical Fund, the Queen said, picking up the forms they had filled out the day before. Everything appears to be in order. The fund was established many years ago because we realized that the people who serve our family often face difficulties. They feel they cannot share with us. James listened carefully, still hardly believing this conversation was happening. What I find most admirable about your situation, the Queen continued, is that despite your personal worries, your service record shows that your work as a guard has never suffered. Your supervisors consistently rate your performance as excellent. Thank you, Your Majesty, James managed to say. This job means everything to me. I can see that, the Queen replied. And that's exactly the kind of dedication we want to support. I'm pleased to inform you that your application has been approved. The fund will cover the full cost of Emma's treatment. James felt tears welling up in his eyes. He tried to speak but couldn't find the words. However, the Queen continued, there are a few conditions. First, you must take the time off you need to be with your sister during her treatment. We'll arrange for temporary coverage of your duties. James nodded, still overwhelmed. Second, once Emma is recovered, I'd like you to consider a new role. We're creating a position for someone to help other staff members navigate situations like yours. George suggested that you would be perfect for this job because you understand what it's like to need help but feel unable. to ask for it. Prince George looked pleased that his grandmother had remembered his suggestion. The position would come with additional training and a salary increase, the Queen added. You would work with our Human Resources Department to make sure all staff members know about the various support programs available to them. James could hardly believe what he was hearing. Not only was Emma going to get the treatment she needed, but he was being offered a promotion that would help other people in similar situations. There's one more thing, the Queen said with a gentle smile. George asked if it would be possible for him to write a letter to Emma. He thought she might like to know that someone her age is thinking about her. James looked at Prince George, who had pulled out a carefully written letter from his pocket. I wrote it last night, the prince explained. I told her that she's very brave and that I hope the treatment works perfectly. Your Majesty, Prince George, James finally found his voice. I don't know how to express my gratitude. My whole family will be forever grateful for your kindness. There's no need for excessive gratitude, the Queen replied. This is simply how things should work. People help each other when they can. Prince George nodded enthusiastically, and James promised that once Emma gets better, he'll help other people learn about getting help too. Excellent, the Queen said. That's exactly the spirit we hope to encourage. As the meeting came to an end, the Queen stood up and shook James's hand personally. Please give my best wishes to Emma and your family. Let them know that they are in our thoughts. James walked out of that room feeling like his entire life had been transformed. In the span of just a few days, a 10-year-old prince had noticed his distress, researched solutions, and helped him access resources he never knew existed. 3 months later, James stood in the hospital corridor watching his sister Emma walk down the hallway without any assistance. The treatment had been even more successful than the doctors had hoped. Emma's strength had returned, her energy was back, and the medical tests showed that her condition was completely under control. I can't believe how different everything is now, Emma said to James as they sat in the hospital cafeteria during her final checkup. When you told me that a prince had helped us, I thought you were making it up. James smiled, remembering how shocked his entire family had been when he explained what had happened. His parents had cried when they realized Emma could get the treatment she needed, and they had been amazed by the story of Prince George's kindness. Did you really become friends with him? Emma asked, looking at the letter Prince George had written to her, which she had read dozens of times. I think so, James replied. He still waves at me when I see him at the castle, and sometimes he asks how you're doing. Emma had written a thank you letter back to Prince George, telling him about her treatment and how much his kindness had meant to her and the whole family. Prince George had responded with another letter, this time including a small drawing of the castle garden where he and James had talked. When do you start your new job? Emma asked. Next week, James said. I'll still be working at the castle, but now I'll be helping other staff members who might be going through difficult times. The new position had turned out to be everything the Queen had promised and more. James would be working with a small team dedicated to making sure all royal staff knew about the support programs available to them. He had spent the past month training with human resources specialists and learning about all the different ways the royal household helped its employees. I'm so proud of you, Emma said. You're going to help so many people. During Emma's treatment period, James had already started informally helping other castle staff. Word had spread quietly about his experience, and several guards and household workers had approached him with their own problems. James had been able to connect a cook with financial assistance for his elderly mother's care and help a gardener's daughter get a scholarship for university. You know what's funny? Emma said as they prepared to leave the hospital for the last time. This whole thing started because you looked sad, and a 10-year-old boy noticed. If Prince George hadn't been paying attention that day, none of this would have happened. James had thought about that many times over the past few months. It amazed him how one moment of genuine human connection had changed everything for his family. The next day, James was back at work in his new role when he received a message that Prince George wanted to see him in the garden. It had become their unofficial meeting place, and James always enjoyed their conversations. Emma looked really happy in the photos your family sent, Prince George said as they sat on their usual bench. The treatment worked perfectly, didn't it? Better than anyone expected, James replied. The doctors say she's completely healthy now. She's even planning to go back to school next month. Prince George smiled widely. That's wonderful news. My grandmother will be so pleased to hear it. Prince George, James said, I wanted to thank you again for everything you did. But more than that, I wanted to tell you about the people we've been able to help since I started the new job. Over the next few minutes, James told Prince George about the cook, the gardener's daughter, and 3 other staff members who had received assistance through various royal programs. That's exactly what we hoped would happen, Prince George said proudly. My grandmother says that helping one person often leads to helping many more people. She's right, James agreed. And it all started with you noticing that I needed help and caring enough to do something about it. Prince George looked thoughtful. You know, I learned something important from this too. I used to think that being royal meant people were supposed to serve us. But now I understand that it really means we're supposed to serve others. You're already doing that, James said. You saw someone who needed help and you found a way to help them. That's what real leadership looks like. As they sat in the garden watching the sun set behind the castle walls, both James and Prince George knew that this experience had changed them both. For James, it had shown him that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness, and that ordinary people could make extraordinary differences in each other's lives. For Prince George, it had taught him that true royalty meant using privilege and resources to lift others up. 2 years had passed since that first conversation in the castle garden, and the impact of Prince George's kindness continued to spread in ways no one could have imagined. James had become one of the most respected members of the castle staff, not just for his work as a guard, but for his new role helping other employees navigate difficult times. The staff support program had grown significantly under James's guidance. What started as a way to help one guard's family had evolved into a comprehensive system that ensured no castle employee would ever feel alone during a crisis. James had helped establish support groups, created information sessions about available resources, and worked with management to make the application processes simpler and less intimidating. Emma had not only recovered completely, but had been inspired by her experience to pursue a career in medicine. She was now studying to become a nurse, with plans to specialize in treating children with blood disorders. I want to help other families the way we were helped, she often told James. The story of Prince George's intervention had remained largely private, known only to those directly involved and a few trusted family members. But the effects were visible throughout the castle. Staff morale had improved dramatically as people realized that their workplace truly cared about their well-being beyond their job performance. On a sunny afternoon in spring, James was in his office reviewing applications for the support fund when he received an unexpected visitor. Prince George, now 12 years old and noticeably taller, knocked on his door. "Do you have a few minutes?" Prince George asked politely. "Of course, Your Highness," James said, gesturing to a chair. "What can I help you with today?" Prince George sat down and pulled out a thick folder. "I've been working on a project for school about leadership and service. I wanted to ask you about something." "What kind of project?" James asked, curious. "We're supposed to write about a time when we learned an important lesson about helping others. I wanted to write about what happened with you and Emma, but only if you're comfortable with it." James was touched that Prince George still remembered their experience so vividly and wanted to share the lessons from it. "Of course," James said. "What specifically did you want to include?" Prince George opened his folder, revealing pages of handwritten notes. "I've been thinking about how different things could have been if I hadn't noticed you were upset that day. Or if I had noticed but decided it wasn't my responsibility to help." "What conclusion did you come to?" James asked. "That paying attention to other people's needs isn't just something nice to do. It's actually a responsibility, especially when you have the power to help," Prince George replied thoughtfully. "I also learned that helping one person can create a chain reaction that helps many more people." James smiled at how mature Prince George's thinking had become. "Those are very wise observations. But I also learned something else," Prince George continued. "I learned that the person being helped often becomes the best person to help others in similar situations. You understand what it feels like to need help but be afraid to ask for it, so you can help other people in ways that someone like me never could." James was impressed by the depth of Prince George's understanding. "You're absolutely right about that." Prince George looked at his notes again. "My teacher asked us to think about how our experience might influence our future actions. I've decided that when I'm older and have more official responsibilities, I want to create programs that help people before they reach crisis situations. Instead of waiting for people to ask for help, I want to find ways to offer support earlier." "That's a wonderful goal," James said. "What kinds of programs are you thinking about?" "Well, I've been researching other royal families around the world and I found some interesting ideas. Some have regular check-ins with their staff. Others have anonymous suggestion systems where people can report concerns about their colleagues without getting anyone in trouble." James was amazed by how much thought Prince George had put into this. "I also think," Prince George continued, "that sharing stories like ours could help other people realize it's okay to accept help. Not the personal details, but the general idea that everyone needs support sometimes." "I think that's very wise," James agreed. "A lot of people suffer in silence because they think asking for help makes them weak." Prince George nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. But what we learned is that asking for help actually takes courage, and accepting help gracefully is a skill that makes communities stronger." As their conversation continued, James realized that Prince George had grown into exactly the kind of leader the royal family needed. The young prince had taken a simple act of kindness and learned profound lessons about service, responsibility, and human dignity. "Your Highness," James said as their meeting came to an end, "I want you to know that helping my family changed your life too in all the best ways. You're going to make an exceptional leader someday." Prince George smiled modestly. "I hope so. And I hope that when I do have official responsibilities, I'll remember to always look for the people who might need help but are too proud or scared to ask for it." As James watched Prince George walk away, he reflected on how a single moment of compassion had created ripple effects that were still spreading. Emma was healthy and pursuing her dreams. Dozens of castle staff members had received help they needed, and a future king had learned invaluable lessons about true leadership and service. Most importantly, James realized, they had all learned that real change often starts with one person, simply paying attention to another person's needs and deciding to act with kindness. Prince George's quiet act of noticing and caring had indeed changed everything, creating a legacy of compassion that would continue long into the future.